Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and I am the Director Emeritus of Netivyah Bible Instruction Ministry in Jerusalem, and I've been doing short teachings that I call mind candy. I call them mind candy because there are things that most Christians don't pay attention to, and I consider them important enough to try to teach them on the internet, on Facebook, on Netivyah's Facebook, as often as I can. And today I'm going to talk about a very, very important subject, especially important in Israel today, because today starts the process of the Israeli government, of the Israeli president, to sort out the different parties for the fourth election in less than 2 years, and the possibility of a fifth election in a few months is there. The confusion and total bedlam of the Israeli politics these last couple of years, including the coronavirus, has been a very challenging thing. And so I want to share this teaching with you that essentially deals with the separation of church and state and the implications of these principles. People think that this idea came first of all from the United States of America and the Constitution of the United States of America, signed in Philadelphia, but by very, very interesting men. Not all very Orthodox believers, and not all dedicated to the biblical principles, but supposedly they were. And they decided to separate church and state. And this has been the North American USA paradigm for a long time, although not in reality, because state has mixed in church affairs consistently from the beginning. And the same thing is true in Israel. Israel doesn't have that rule of separation of church and state. I know that David Ben-Gurion and some of the founding fathers of Israel very, very much wanted to have, but the political constellation in the land of Israel with the Orthodox has not really allowed that to happen. Maybe virtually on paper it may exist somewhere, but it has never been put in practice. But it's in the Torah. Separation of church and state is in the Torah, in this very, very sad chapter 10 of the book of Leviticus, that starts with the two sons of Aaron the high priest, Nadab and Abihu, who brought strange fire into the altar, and the land opened up and devoured them, and they were burned alive. And Aaron was forbidden to mourn for his two sons, and tear his clothes and practice the normal mourning practices that a person who loses a relative, especially a close relative like a son, was forbidden by Moses to do any of these things at the loss of his two sons. And then Moses tells him not to tear his clothes, not to, take his hair apart. In other words, open his hairdo and let it go wild. And then in verse 8 of chapter 10, the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations." This text, verse 8, the rabbis say that the reason Aaron's sons were well trained, that were priests, did that strange thing and brought fire, strange fire to the altar was because they were drunk. They must have drunk, and now immediately after their death, God gives instructions to Aaron, instruct your priests, instruct those who serve God not to get drunk, not to drink alcoholic drinks when they go on serving God. Doesn't mean don't drink forever, but while you're serving God or the time you're serving God, don't drink. Don't drink alcoholic drinks. And this should be a rule for all your generations. Verse 10, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, between unclean and clean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. So this phrase in verse 10, so that you may distinguish between what is holy and unholy, between what is unclean and what is clean. Don't mix the secular with the religious. Don't mix the politics with the religious. You are responsible person, and you are not allowed to mix the interests of God and His kingdom and the interest of the secular camp of Israel. Now, Jesus taught the same thing in a little different context. He taught the same thing in Matthew chapter 22. Again, a very different context, but a very interesting context. Matthew chapter 22, and we're going to start reading from verse 16, just to get the context. Verse 16 of, I'll start from verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how they might entangle him in his talk. They want to entangle Yeshua. They want to entangle him, get him in trouble. And we'll see in a minute with who they wanted to get him in trouble. So they sent to him their disciples, the disciples of the Pharisees, with the Herodians, and those are the people who were, I guess, voting for Herod, or faithful to Herod, or considered Herod as their champion, to say the least. And these two groups that don't mix with each other. One is totally secular, Hellenistic, political group, the Herodians, and the other ones are the disciples of the Pharisees, who are supposed to be spiritual, religious, that they were so religious they were tithing from their own garden the mint and the parsley and the other herbs of the gardens that they have. And that I have, so they were very meticulous about these things because they, like Yeshua said in chapter 23 of Matthew, they wanted everybody to know how religious they are, how spiritual they are. And so they mix with the opposite side of the Israeli political spectrum, the Herodians, Hellenists, pagans, political pagans. And they come to Yeshua and they ask him, "Teacher, we know that you are a true and teach the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone. You do not regard the person of men. In other words, you're not a respecter of persons. You speak the truth to everybody the same. You don't play the hypocritical games of the politicians. And we come to you with this compliment. Tell us, Therefore, what do you think? Is it right for us Jews to pay taxes to Caesar, the pagan Roman Caesar, who thinks he's God, who wants people to worship him, and who is an idolater by clearly? You want us to pay taxes to this idolater, despot, dictator, corrupt Caesar? So Yeshua perceived their wickedness, it says so. He understood what they're up to. And they said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? He tags them directly, no respecter of person. Bang. You hypocrites, you came here to test me? Show me the money, the coin, the tax coin. They pull out the tax coin and they said, Yeshua asked them, whose image is it on this inscription, on the coin? I had one time a coin like that, but it's rare and expensive. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe I gave it to somebody very important as a gift, but I can't find it. Arab antiquity dealer friend of mine sold it to him for a very reasonable price many years ago in the 1960s. So Yeshua asked them, whose image is on the coin? They say, Caesar's. Obviously, Caesar. And he said to them, therefore, give what belongs to Caesar, and what belongs to God. On the other side of the coin was actually a picture of a temple. Not the temple in Jerusalem, but a temple. So Yeshua uses that and says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God. And they had heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. So we have the same paradigm, actually, that God tells Aaron in the book of Leviticus. Yeshua is telling his opponents, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the same paradigm, the same idea. Same idea is given to them by Yeshua. What belongs to Caesar, what is secular, what is the government, what is the world, you give to the world. And what belongs to God, give to God. God doesn't want what belongs to the world, and the world doesn't want what belongs to God. So separate the authorities, separate the powers. That's what you ought to be doing. Okay. This principle is not observed. I don't think it's definitely not observed in Israel. It has never been observed in Israel, even though according to the law, there should be such a separation. But there isn't. And, the Orthodox Jewish political parties take every opportunity to take advantage of their political powers to squeeze, to bribe, to use the secular establishment of the State of Israel, and they have a theological excuse for that thing. They say the Zionist Jews that are essentially secular are the Messiah's donkey. The Messiah will come on the back of the secular state, which builds the land, builds the roads, provides universities, education, hospitals, medicine, social services, you name it. Vaccines, free. to millions of Israelis, both Jews and Arabs. Orthodox originally didn't want to get vaccinated, but when they realized that their community is the most infected community of all, next to the Arabs, then the rabbis politically were pressured, and they commanded their crowds to get vaccinated. So they're also vaccinated about 70-80% of their communities right now, and the numbers are coming down. But this idea of separation of authorities, what belongs to God, give to God, and what belongs to your country, give to the country. There are other texts in the New Testament what Paul says in the same context. Pay your taxes. You pay your taxes. Fulfill your obligation to the government that has an army and protects you from the enemies, has judges and laws and courts that judges and adjudicates between you and your neighbor over tort laws, land, accident, whatever. The government is there to serve you, and therefore you should be faithful to the government, which is something that the Orthodox are faithful only to get the taxes and only to take advantage of the government, not there to serve the government or to serve the nation. Generally speaking, they don't go to the army. They supposedly don't work, and if they officially don't work, and if they don't work officially, they don't also pay taxes. They get money from the government to study the Torah, which originally was 4,000 people. Now it's 400,000 people that get this tax. Originally, when Ben Gurion agreed to that in 1948, he agreed to 4,000 people. Now the numbers have climbed. It pays to become Orthodox. You don't have to go to the army. You don't have to. You get money from the government for studying Torah. All kinds of things like that. Yeah, what can you say? That's what it is. But here is the mind candy. This principle that Yeshua is giving us, to give what belongs to Caesar, what belongs to the government, to the secular, supposedly not involved government, which even in the United States is very involved. If you stop prayer in school, if you take the 10 commandments of the courthouses, if you forbid children in high school to read their Bible on the campus of the high school, you're mixing in religion. Sure thing, you're mixing in religion. You're forbidden personal freedoms and mixing in religion. But besides that, we, even in Israel or anywhere else in the world, have to see that the Torah says separate between the holy and the secular, the mundane. Whatever belongs to God's service, do God's service. Whatever belongs to the government, you do whatever your obligation to the government is. Whether it is to go to the army or send your children to the army when there was a draft, or to pay your taxes. But don't mix politics with religion. Don't bring strange fire to God's altar. And this is something that needs to be observed. In Israel, for sure. In other countries, maybe. And I think in the United States also, for sure. Theoretically, it should be working that way. Practically, it doesn't, and we saw it in the previous administration, and we're going to see it on the other side of the coin in the future administrations, unless there is a real serious public outcry, both in Israel and in the United States, for the Christians to get their rights back, to have the right to stand on their moral ground, to have the right to pray in public places, to have the right to pray anywhere they want to pray, without impunity, without breaking the law. And the interesting thing is, it's in the Torah and in the Gospels at the same time, that give Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give God what belongs to God. And what belongs to God? Our lives, our souls, our freedoms to worship, to serve, to give, to function. And what belongs to Caesar? It's all the government obligations and taxes and services that we ought to serve the larger community of believers and unbelievers. That belongs to us too. We are obligated as citizens to work and to pay taxes and not to seek, get by as much as we can not to pay our taxes. We have to be honest and not cheat on our taxes. That's what filthy lucre in the qualification of elders in Timothy and in Titus really means. It means in the Jewish context, in that term, it means that an elder should not avoid to pay his taxes. And therefore the church, the synagogue in the Jewish context of the early 2nd century, the synagogue paid the rabbi's salary and his taxes, so that there would be no chance of him being accused as being a tax evader. So that's very interesting, and God bless all of you, and learn from the Torah and from Yeshua to separate your obligations and stand for your rights, to give God what is God's and to give the government what belongs to the government. May God bless all of you and all of us to be wise and to be honest, both toward God and toward our governments. And remember, Ananias and Sapphira died on the spot because they wanted to take credit for something that they didn't give. They said they gave the property that they sold for the church and for the Lord to take care of the poor brothers and sisters who were in Jerusalem when the community swelled with 3,000 people at one time, and many of them were foreigners. They were Jews, but they were from other lands. So they had to be taken care of, and that's what the raising of the money was for. So, my dear brothers and sisters, don't take credit for what you didn't do. For God, that's the strange fire that devoured Ananias and Sapphira too. God bless all of you.